Hi, did we start too soon?
No, this is perfect. I say just welcome,
Good.
welcome the people.
Welcome to the people, our listeners this week. I would like to just let everyone do their quick introduction, and then we're going to go over the news of the week. And then we have two more origin stories to go over. So I'm Jamie Reed. I am directing the cats this week. I'm herding this production, which was very hard to schedule.
Mhm.
And I welcome Lisa to do your introduction.
And we should say this is our podcast. We've decided for now to call Informed Dissent. And I'm one of Jamie's cats. So yeah, Lisa Sellen Davis. I've been calling myself a gender culture war reporter, working on a book about the youth gender culture war. Eliza, you go.
I'm Eliza Mondegreen, and I research and write about online communities and gender-affirming care.
And I'm Ben Appel. I'm a writer. I write about gender issues and culture stuff, and I have a book coming out someday, Cis White Gay.
We
That's it.
settled on the title.
hmm
It's a
Wonderful.
good title.
It's
Yeah,
a good title. It is a good title.
thanks.
Congrats.
Thanks.
Okay, so some of us thought that this week was a little light in the gender news, but I think I still have 5 things that I thought we could review.
Also, just to let our listeners know, Corey will be back next week. He is not available right now. And so he'll be with us again next week.
And maybe next week we should talk about how hard it is to figure out
Pronouns.
pronoun standards in writing and in the news, because
It'll be a good
I think
discussion.
Yep, it's really hard to have a policy. And I mean, you could just have a sex-based policy, and you could just have a entirely subjective gender identity-based policy. But the truth is there are a few exceptions probably to each of those occasionally. And it's very hard to make policy about the exceptions to the rules, because policies are about rules that benefit the greatest number of people. So that I just keep thinking about that over and over again.
And the policy, and also like there's nuance to it, because some people, when you see someone, your brain just automatically processes that person as one sex or the other, according to their appearance. So in some cases, it would be more work to try to do sex-based pronouns when you're seeing someone that, quote unquote, passes as the opposite sex if they're attempting to present as the opposite sex. So it gets tricky.
Guess we could have called this podcast Passages.
so. I'm going to go through the 5 topic ideas that I kind of pulled from the news, and then I think we can kind of decide which one we wanted to talk about first. So, big story was in the Washington Post this week. Their editorial board actually put out a story regarding puberty blockade and pediatric gender medicine and the science behind it in the US. I think the biggest element of that was simply what publication it was in and how it was basically just talking about what many of us have known for a number of years. We saw a piece by Helen Lewis in The Atlantic, which I did not try to pick a fight with Helen Lewis on X, but I had a little bit of a spicy thought about that piece that we can go over. We saw an important wedding occur with Aaron Reed and Zoe Zephyr. And I found one of the interesting elements of that was actually the officiant of their wedding. And so I thought we might want to just touch base. It did happen. It's kind of somewhat relevant. Disney's Pixar decided to cut some video out of an upcoming film, which I think I've seen the video that was cut. I don't know if it's legit, like what they actually cut, but I thought we might want to talk about that. And then this is totally something that happened yesterday that the three of you might not have even seen yet. But trigonometry, the fellows released an episode with Stephen Fry,
Mhm.
Okay.
an actor in the UK. I best know Stephen Fry for his cameo appearances on one of my favorite shows called Bones. I don't think it's actually what he's the most well known for.
Mhm.
But Stephen Fry is a gay man, and in his trigonometry episode, they read him a question from a gay man who is used to be associated with Stonewall, is now associated with the LGB Alliance. And Stephen Fry replied that Stonewall got stuck in this terrible quagmire and made a couple points saying that he kind of doesn't agree with Stonewall's position. So I think we continue to see some of these differences between over there and over here, with Helen Lewis's piece and even with that kind of Stephen Fry. So what do we want to talk about first? Anything jump out?
Well, I think the Washington Post piece and Helen Lewis's piece in the Atlantic are quite related because they're both about how to understand the bans, the science, and the political situation. So do you want to just go summarize each piece?
And relive your Twitter fight with Lewis.
Mhm.
Sure. So Lisa, why don't you relive the Washington Post piece and I will relive my fight with Helen Lewis on Twitter.
So the Washington Post piece was written by the editorial board, which I think is a big deal because then it's not anybody who's working on a book or invested in this in any way. It's a left-wing editorial board. I mean, I think we should move beyond having political slants in editorial sections of publications. I don't think I don't understand the reason for it. And I think it'd be better if they all committed to exploring issues from lots of different sides. Nonetheless, it's a very liberal newspaper. The editorial board is a bunch of liberals, and as far as I know, at least the editorial section is liberal. And they said that the issue before the Supreme Court, that which we've talked about, the Scarametti, U.S. versus Scarametti case, which is about if it is constitutional or not to ban gender-affirming care for youth if it's a form of sex-based discrimination. That really the issue should be about science, and that it turns out the science doesn't support it. Shocking to liberal America, who's been told that these are evidence-based and life-saving.
Including told by the Washington Post.
Mhm.
Including told by the Washington Post many times. And so it was a big deal because even though it's not, the New York Times is more important in terms of telling liberals how and what to think, but nonetheless, it was a moment of what do we see when we pull back the left-right frame? And I think since our podcast is called Informed Dissent, one of the things we're trying to do is give people the information they need so that they can dissent. And part of that information is that it is not evidence-based care, and there is no proof that it's life-saving. And I think the Washington Post editorial underscored that.
Did it reach their readers? Do we have any sense that it?
I didn't see much of a reaction to, I mean, there was such a furious reaction down to parking a Glad truck on the street in New York City, to the New York Times' various attempts to report on this, and to Pamela Paul's editorial columns. Maybe I missed it, but I haven't seen much about the Washington Post op-ed.
There was more of a backlash with them refusing to endorse a presidential candidate.
Right.
Yeah, I wonder if one tactic is to
Ignore.
Ignoring?
Right.
yeah.
Hope it goes away.
Which would be learning.
Yeah, you're right.
Would be learning.
Wait, it's not so good when we get detention, so maybe we shouldn't try to get attention anymore.
Ooh.
Well, okay, so it didn't incite a backlash among the staunch supporters of these interventions and the ideology that goes with
Well, then again, is anybody on Blue Sky? Because maybe we just missed it.
I
And in
go,
between
I
the death threats,
check
maybe
in
people were
there.
really mad.
Did Aaron
Okay.
Reed write a piece with the big
No,
the
Aaron,
bump to cross it, or was Aaron too busy getting married?
no, Aaron was not too busy getting married to write about the 37 Congress people who passed the NDAA
Right.
and signed out their names, I guess, so that people could bombard them with anger. Although other people can use that list and bombard them with thank yous.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That issue has been reported in the standard way of
Mhm.
evil Republicans
Yes.
being mean, and the New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, sorry, I'll just say this and then I'll be quiet, was on our local New York City public radio station this morning, WNYC, which is completely unable.
Did they hang up on you again?
They actually did. They did hang up on me.
Oh,
Again?
Something, not while I was, I call in and I say, this is what I want to say. And then they just,
and then they just click. Like,
so they were talking about, she wants Biden to ratify the ERA before he vacates office. And then they talked about the NDAA, the defense spending bill that she signed, and but reluctantly. And then they discussed this amendment that admittedly the Republicans stuffed in at the last minute, saying we're not going to pay for gender medicine for the children of military personnel. And they just 100% dismissed it as partisan, mean-spirited, and no mention of, by the way, across the pond, they're essentially doing the same thing with the Labor Party support. I mean, just a complete refusal. Like the Washington Post editorial had not made it to the people telling New Yorkers what to think.
Mm.
Not at all. So what does it mean? Is it an important moment, or did I just get my reality check and it just felt good to me?
Well, maybe I do think that a PR tactic, like Eliza said, they're learning, but I do think a good PR tactic is to ignore. I think that when something's effective, you either squash it or ignore it, and this was probably too big for them to be able to squash. So perhaps people like us should keep it in the spotlight, and really do what we can to, put it on a megaphone, reminding people of what the Washington Post editorial board just admitted and wrote about.
so let's kind of pivot over to Helen Lewis's piece. So my first admittance, I don't subscribe to The Atlantic. I am a huge New York Times fan, so I've been a subscriber there for a long time. So I actually had to wait a tiny bit to find the free PDF version of The Atlantic piece. So I'm gonna just go ahead and admit that. That's why my tweet maybe was a few days late. I actually really adore Helen Lewis. Every time she's ever on Bar Pod, I find those to be the best episodes. Like she's
Those
fun.
are the best episodes.
They're the best episodes. I don't know. Sometimes I just want to be like, boot one of the other. Yeah, and just Ellen Katie production would be.
She's hilarious and a great writer. We're not going to make this about Helen, but we can talk about how she framed the story of the bands.
Yeah, I was
yeah. So
really upset.
give people summarize it for
Okay.
people who can read it.
So, most of the piece, the part that I'm kind of like, kept being the red state bans, the red state bans. It was kind of like the phrase that you just keep seeing. But then towards the end, she wrote, having opposed the red state bans, I was surprised to find myself welcoming what happened in the UK with this indefinite pause of puberty blockers. And I was a little bit pissed because in some ways I didn't really see the difference. And so then she went on to write, then I realized the difference. Streeting is a democratically elected politician following the advice of an independent report led by a senior pediatrician backed by the gold standard of research. And
they were Republicanly elected, though, in the United States.
all of the states that have led bans, I was like, were they not democratically elected legislators in these states just because they're Republicans? Like, the red states don't like have a dictatorship and then the blue states get to vote in the democracy. I was a little bit upset by that. She mentioned that the UK indefinite ban or indefinite pause, and this is where it comes to language for me, the indefinite pause in puberty blockers is going to be reviewed in 2027. Well, a number of the states have sunset clauses in their legislation so that their ban will sunset. Some of them have grandfather clauses. So if you're already on treatment, you got to stay. And then kind of the other thing she wrote about in the piece was kind of this, the UK's here and the US is here. And I just, I wrote a tweet and maybe it was over the top, but, she mentioned that in the UK, they never allowed minor surgeries as part of their NHS kind of standard. And I said, we castrated a young man on television at the age of 17. And so this, like, the difference of how we kind of took what they were doing and I feel like we put it on steroids here. And
sometimes literally.
Yeah, I just feel like sometimes it's lost. And so when people start complaining about these horrid red state bans, and I keep doing air quotes in case people are only listening. I really just feel like these were democratically elected officials who were, for the most part, following the science, who put in reasonable restrictions on a pediatric medical intervention.
Mm-hmm.
That no one else had proposed an alternative. No one else. I've never seen anything floated about, look, so, the WPATH standards of care essentially say do whatever you want, don't get sued. I mean, in the end, that's what they say. And I haven't seen anything between that and a ban or someone saying, let's copy the guidelines from Sweden or Finland and just put NIH on them, something. Who has offered that? I mean, and I think that having one of the ways to understand the bans is that they are filling this vacuum because no one rose up to say, all right, this is out of control. What can we do instead? Should we block the puberty of gender-affirming care as a pause button, or should we establish whatever? Should we take a break and follow up with it? No one has ever offered any consolation, any alternative. And for me, I think bans are very frightening. I think it's a frightening way to regulate medicine, but we don't have anyone else to do it. We don't have a healthcare system that's beholden to its taxpayers. We just have a kind of runaway capitalism. There's no one to put the brakes on anything other than Republicans and a bunch of people working behind the scenes with Republicans who are not anything like the people whose faces are on these bills. not literally.
Yeah, and there was just not a meaningful debate inside medical societies. No sign that self-regulation was on the way.
That's right.
Yeah.
There was no environment in which there could be a debate. In fact, this morning on the Brian Lehrer show, when they were dismissing the NDAA as nothing but mean-spirited, Brian Lehrer is kind of was thought of as the foremost journalist in New York City and the fairest guy, and he would talk to anybody, but it just, like a lot of places, WNYC went full woke in the past decade. So he said, oh, doing it this way, just cutting it out, it prevents having meaningful debate about the issue.
Oh, but he said that on a program that won't allow for meaningful debate.
That the screeners hang up on you if you say, well, how are we going to have the ERA if we can't defend
Sorry,
it?
Lisa. I just keep imagining someone in the background being like, it's that Lisa woman again. Hang up on her. Hang up. And then there'd be like, we took back her coffee mug and her tote bag. I don't know why she thinks keep calling us.
No, we'll be having a ritual burning of public radio paraphernalia. That will be our that's for subscribers at the highest level. That'll be an event we offer if you would like to do something.
Bring your old NPR merch that you got from your pledge.
Your broken NPR umbrella, bring it here and we'll recycle it into something.
But
we'll upcycle it into something else.
I'm really frustrated, and I have nothing but I could just spew bile right now thinking about all of this and just like how dumb this has become. And the only reason I'm saying that is because I feel like maybe a lot of our listeners feel similarly when they hear us talk about this. Like, we just bring up what these folks are saying on WNYC and how they're saying, we should have a debate first, or, Helen Lewis was great, but saying, oh, I see the difference. This was a democratically elected leader. Like, this stuff is crazy making. And so, Lisa, you were talking about like pulling apart the left and right framing of it, and also kind of helping people have not just talking points, but be able to talk about this and speak back against it. Maybe this is a good segue for that, but how do you do that when you're trying to manage your frustration and emotions around it? Like I feel like I'm doing right now by just being quiet and not saying anything absolutely crazy.
So you feel like you have to like bite your tongue right now and just be like, is that anger because do you also see that these state level restrictions were the only pathway forward?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And we kind of had, like, somebody had to do something.
Somebody had to do something, and it's just the absolute hypocrisy and just the total just detachment from reality about what's going on the ground, and the inability to see that beyond really the left and right framing of it, about how this is just a cruel thing that we're so through the looking glass. I've said this a million times, but we're so far through the looking glass that framing things like that is still like you're living in the past. You're living in a former era where that simple framing of things kind of sort of made sense. We're beyond that now. Things have just exploded in our culture. And with social media and with everything that's gone on in politics, and with this disruption of normal politics in the US, we're no longer there. So people need to catch up and start talking like real people are talking, and folks that are driving the conversation in these spaces, these elite spaces, like, I mean, we see what the Washington Post has just done, but whether it's WNYC or wherever, they need to catch up with all of us, because it's frustrating, and I'm getting tired of negotiating with morons,
Well, and I don't want to say to give somebody from the UK, an out here, but I do also think that the framing lens that she put this through is absolutely reductive. So I live in a quote red state, but I also was
Mhm.
there in the legislature when we were discussing these bills, and I know who showed up there to talk. And it is
Mhm.
detransitioners, it's parents of kids who've been negatively affected, it's gays and lesbians, it's, it is not how it's painted when you're on the ground in these states, seeing who's showing up in the legislature and who's meeting with who. We kind of joke when I'm in these meetings, this is the strangest bedfellows,
Mhm.
but I still think that some of those top-down writers are really missing what is happening from a bottom-up perspective.
Hmm.
Well, I have two things I want to say about that. I mean, one is that I I've been unable to sell any stories about the strange bedfellows. I mean, I have chronicling it in the book, but there's been no interest from anyone I've ever written for really about it. About there are a lot of people working with the Republicans that who never would have imagined that they'd be doing that. And that's been known for a long time because you can see some older stories from trans writers in lefty media saying like rad femmes and conservative Christians hate trans people so much that they get together. So that was the only time that ever got mentioned, was that it was framed that way. But I think I'm not sure that bans were the only way. I mean, couldn't Republicans have put forth the guidelines like Finland's? Couldn't they have said we're only going to do this in controlled studies, and
Oh.
couldn't they have? Wasn't there some alternative?
So, but then, okay, so this is where my old school lefty comes out. That would involve money.
Mm-hmm.
That would have involved, so then it would have involved a red, a primarily Republican legislature having to then put money into this. So you're giving, like, the alternative is they could have just said, we're not doing this anymore, stop. Or you're kind of saying, funnel money into what? Data collection, a clinical study, like that would have cost a ton of money. And then how would you have carried that out? Because it would have been carried out by the gender clinicians.
Well, how much did it cost to go to the Supreme Court? How much did it cost? I don't know. How much did the
You
bans
mean from the
cost?
state?
Yeah, they had to pay a ton of expert witnesses. They have to, it's a lot of money to lawsuits are a lot of money.
I think it's maybe an easier sell to constituents than,
Yeah,
let's take your tax dollars and fund an experiment on kids.
Even in Ohio, though, I mean, DeWine, and I'm sorry, my deaf dog has decided to start barking. DeWine had put forward those ideas of all of this data that he wanted to collect, and then those become the state level institution has to carry out the policy. Well, if anybody's aware of what's going on in Oregon right now, they passed a law that says you have to provide this care, but then they also have these requirements that has to be evidence-based, and like they're hitting these walls where they're like, is WPATH evidence-based? No, it's not. How is the state going to carry this out? And I think in some of those states, the alternative would have been having a state legislature try to go up against the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Society, WPATH. That would have been a huge undertaking.
You're muted, Lisa.
You're muted, Lisa.
Lisa.
Oh, someone should have jumped in. Sorry. I was trying to cover up the hissing steam pipe. All that is true, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't a less harsh way to do it. But I will say, just in terms of the way that Atlantic piece was framed, the phrase that Republicans are against gender nonconformity.
Oh, yes.
I think it says it twice in
Yes.
and that seems to mean that they're talking about banning sex change medicine. I'm just going to call it that because then we know what it is, for adults. And that is a very strange conflation of being against gender nonconformity. Having said that, it would be wonderful to see Republicans say more clearly, we're fine with gender nonconforming kids. We're fine with gay people, if they would say that, some of them. And we know that boys and girls can be all different kinds of ways. And this is not about to reestablish, no, we actually are not trying to force you into traditional gender roles. Maybe the people who are dismissing this as hateful and whatever what did he say? Mean-spirited and all about politics would not be able to claim that if they were clearer that this is just about these interventions and not about making boys and girls act like normal boys and girls.
But think about how hard it has been for people who have really strong progressive credentials to be heard on their own terms, even when they do make all of those things clear. I mean, I just don't really see a way that Republicans being defined as the enemy could have framed the interventions that would have shut down dishonest criticism. I don't know.
Well, let's pivot for a moment. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, did anybody watch the part of the video that Pixar cut?
So I think there was something they cut from an earlier film, but then what they're talking about is this new a new series, a Pixar series called Win or Lose, which is about a co-ed softball team, which is kind of fascinating that they were going to have a trans character on a co-ed softball team, because technically that would be the solution. Have a co-ed softball team. But what I read was that they had a few lines about the character's gender identity, and that the character is played by a trans woman, and that it was in the film the character is a trans girl, and that they cut those lines.
So good or bad? Should they have cut this?
What do you guys think?
I don't know. I would have to see it,
Yeah,
you know.
I'd have to see it too.
But I mean, yeah. What do you think, Jamie?
I mean, I have the youngest kids, right?
Mhm.
So mine are 3, 5, 7. I don't think my kids that age need to be exposed to a trans character that's also a child
Mhm.
in a film.
Mhm.
I just don't.
What Disney said was many parents would prefer to discuss certain subjects on their own terms and timelines. And I think that is very true and very appropriate. And that puts me at odds with liberals and how they want to do comprehensive sex ed. But the turn in Disney is really fascinating. When I used to work in kids TV, and I worked on this show Blue's Clues for years. And one of the assistants to the producers had she had been a Disney princess at the theme park. She had walked around dressed as, maybe it was Snow White, I forget. And at that time, Disney had these very strict codes for employees, and right down to how clean your fingernails had to be. That there was tremendous kind of overreach in how people had to behave, even if you were employed by them, even on your own time. And then a couple of years ago, there was that footage leaked of a CEO saying, "We're going to queer the heck out of Disney." I can't remember the quote. And they had the Buzz Lightyear movie with a same-sex kiss. They had a few products with queer storylines, and they mostly didn't perform well. So one way to understand this decision is, is that Republicans are winning and this isn't, in retreat. But another way to understand it is they're looking at things like the backlash, what happened to Bud Light after putting Dylan Mulvaney on the can, and and cueing to the phrase "go woke, go broke." Like maybe it's just not good for business.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that they're sincere in their quote, though. If they really were saying this should be a parental decision and maybe when and how these things are introduced are up to parents, I don't know that it needs to be in their catalog that's being geared towards a younger age cohort. Because I think part of what they make is also geared at different ages. Did your kids see the Red Panda movie, Lisa?
I think so. The puberty one.
Yeah, yeah, the puberty one.
Mm-hmm.
And she gets her period and she starts turning into the red panda. I watched that with my now 14-year-old, on the autism spectrum, and he was like, I'm not ready for this movie. Like he's telling me I wasn't ready for this topic, Mom. Like, why are we having this and he was so uncomfortable. He was like, the movie's having this conversation. But I was like, but I'm ready for us to have this conversation and I'm your grown up. And so we're watching this movie. But I do think there's some element to like, who are they gearing it to? Who is their intended audience? And if that audience for that film was, I don't think any kid needs to have that introduced to them. As children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, for some reason, my brain keeps thinking about gender dysphoria and like what it actually is. Okay. Because there's just a massive overdiagnosis of gender dysphoria, right? And so when we're talking about this, I feel like people that are still, let's say, advocating for quote unquote gender affirming care or access to this and think that it's cruel, they're kind of framing it in this way of, oh, there are these kids that are gender dysphoric and they are miserable. They want to cut off their genitals and they want to die, and they can't exist in their own bodies. And so how could anyone want to deny them some kind of relief? Okay, we know with the truth about this, or at least we've read the studies and we know what is actually happening on the ground. Like those, Jamie, you had in one of our former podcast, you had that talk about like it always ends up with like the three remaining kids, the three kids who are, actually really gender dysphoric and have really severe issues regarding this, what to do with them. And you had said, we make more space for gender nonconformity, or we make them comfortable with living in their bodies and being different in this society that enforces gender norms and gender roles. But I guess I feel like we should talk about gender dysphoria at some point because, it changed from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. It's essentially the same thing. But when we look at these definitions of how they diagnose this, a lot of it is just gender nonconformity. And then now they've conflated trans with gender dysphoria, with gender nonconformity, with non-binary. And it's just exploded into this massive overdiagnosis of people saying, oh, I'm gender dysphoric. I have dysphoria. I mean, I've heard it so many times from grown people who have said, oh, I'm so dysphoric about my facial hair. It's reached this level of just complete insanity. And so sometimes I'm like, is gender dysphoria even real? Like, what is that? This is just distress about, how can I feel like the way that the DSM and, the medical industry and the psychiatric industry have maybe it's activism's encroachment upon these industries that has veered it so off course. But I guess it's just, for some reason, that's just in my brain. Like, who are these people? What are we talking about when we're saying this?
Well, I think that's really interesting, Ben, because I think what you might be getting at is it really an issue of Disney letting parents lead the way? Or is it maybe Disney actually recognizing, maybe somebody recognized, would we be pushing forward a mental illness into a child, like a kid's cohort that doesn't even need this to be them to be even exposed to it? Because I mean, part of
100%.
why we see the explosions
Mhm.
in these contagions is because it's propagated in through, you know, our discourse. I mean, Sarah probably could speak to that. Like, if you put
Mhm.
that in a children's movie or show, do you not increase the likelihood of?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, was like, the question is, are we representing something that just naturally exists in and is part of the like natural range of human diversity, which is of course the language WPATH wants us to use, the language activists want to use, and the way many people do see gender dysphoria? Or are we creating it through suggestion in vulnerable kids? And I wish I hope that that's kind of a recognition that was underneath Disney's statement, although we'll see.
What do you see, Eliza? Like, what do you see online, and what do you think in terms of your research?
In terms of the question of, are we creating it?
Yeah, are we
Or
creating it, and what are we talking about? Is gender dysphoria real?
Mhm.
Is it a faulty diagnosis? Is it obviously overdiagnosed, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, I think we should come back to this when we have Corey, but just really briefly, what I see all the time online is, young women, young men, boys, girls coming online, and they will say something like, I thought that other kids felt this way, especially around puberty, just sucking. And then they'll be like, and then I heard about trans people, and I realized that I felt this way because I was trans. So it's changing the attribution of normal feelings to this pathological wrong body need to change. And
And there's probably a big overlap with ASD, with autism spectrum as well, too, right?
yeah, a lot
Because
of these kids, yeah, do describe stuff like that. But increasingly, like, these are kids who, what I have seen over the about 7 years that I've been watching kind of the online communities is it went from being mostly kids who were probably just going to grow up to be gay and got diverted into this, to it has just widened and widened and widened in terms of the
Yeah.
kinds of kids who might consider themselves to be transgender. And that it especially blew up, like just exploded. These communities just exploded during the pandemic.
mhm.
You know, I was thinking a lot about this yesterday, and I was thinking about how obviously a lot of modern medicine, especially in a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and the business model is turning a normal human experience into a disease that needs to be treated,
Mhm.
sadness and etc. Right, and there are some people that these interventions have allowed them to have a quote unquote normal life, but most of the people taking antidepressants are not non-functionally depressed. They just don't feel that good, and then they take this drug and they feel better, right? And they don't want to feel the uncomfortable feelings, or we feel terrible, bad about how we look, and there's a giant industry that you can do all kinds of things to feel better about how you look, and they work pretty well. We have psychosurgery all the time, and facelifts and etc. So this is a pretty normal interplay of the American medical establishment, the healthcare industry, capitalism, the American ethos. But this is so extraordinary because now the experience is puberty. Now the experience is becoming an adult, and that is the disease. And now there is nothing wrong with your body. It was one thing to say, like, there's something a little wrong with your mind, and let me adjust the way the chemicals unfold in there, a little tamp something down, and titrate so something goes up. Now we have convinced an entire generation that there's this truth, this gender identity that's like the shiny silver ball. I don't know if I talked about this last time, but I used to fantasize about this myself as a kid, as a tween and teen, because my body came out kind of funny in a variety of ways. I mean, my face came out funny, but also I was kind of chubby, and my I had like 90-year-old boobs right when they came out. And I was so full of shame. I'm still so full of shame. And I would just fantasize about if I could just reach down my throat and get the little silver ball of that is me and put it in a different container.
Mhm.
And now I'm like, I don't even want that silver ball. That's no good either. Let's take a different personality also
Mhm.
and a different container. But I think there must be a lot of kids feeling that way,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
their job is they excavate that. It's the silver ball. We convince them that the brain is the thing that's consistent, the
Mhm.
thing that's forever, that's true, and the thing that's malleable is their body, which and therefore we
Mhm.
attend to the body. That is a wild idea. And it wasn't that hard to teach people that, because I think that is a common fantasy of wanting to
Mhm.
escape your body, especially when you are a teenager, especially when you are depressed or lonely or funny looking, or your boobs came out looking like an old lady's, or whatever it is, you know? So I think it is an extraordinary message that your body is malleable and
Mhm.
your mind is not.
Mhm.
And it's also not true. And I think
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
only realize that after they change their bodies. You know, the detransitioners are like, oh no, I can't get my breasts back. I can't get my voice back. I can't get those years back.
Mhm.
And it's just a, sorry,
It's like wherever you go, there you are. You know, I mean, addicts and alcoholics in recovery have a say for that too. You know, there's something called the geographical cure. You know, you think that, you know, if I just move to this new area, if I just go to this new state, meet new people, do this, and then wherever you go, there you are. Your problems come along with you. It's like wherever, you know, no matter what you do to your body and what body parts you sever or change with hormones, you're still there. It's still you. But Lisa, it was interesting hearing you talk about like because for me, you were saying earlier about, you know, the, you know, just over medication, you know, people are sad, they need a drug. I mean, coming up when I was a kid, I'm nearly 42. So I was, you know, this was like the mid 90s when I was a
And
teenager.
And Ben, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute because what I want you to do is I want you to take this kernel of what you started and I want you to go into your origin story here.
Oh,
Because
okay.
what I think the through line is going to be is that the two people left to speak are the homosexuals.
Oh, okay. There you go. The homos. Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
'cause-
wait a
yeah.
minute. I have to say, I was talking to somebody yesterday about lesbian until graduation, you know, lugs.
okay.
Now, by the way, I was saying how all the girls say that they're lesbians, so it's really hard to tell who's actually gay,
Mhm.
because now lugs means lug until middle school graduation. It's
Oh my
just so
God.
much earlier now, then they become straight in high school. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to add that in because that was
Wow.
a conversation I had this week that I realized that was a new phenomenon.
Wow.
But
All
let's
right.
go into the
Well, yeah.
pros.
Well,
Yeah.
you were saying I was thinking about, you know, for me, I mean, I was a kid who, you know, all of you know on this, and a lot of our listeners might know from things if they know, they're familiar with what I've written. I was a really girly kid, right? I was really effeminate. I was bullied mercilessly. You know, I had a religious upbringing, had a hard time with that. When I started to go through puberty, I realized, oh, I am what these kids are calling me. I am gay. You know, and I was just completely tormented and tortured. And, you know, I developed OCD, a severe form of obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, you know, but the doctor, what it was framed as was, oh, you have a chemical imbalance. You know, you have a chemical imbalance. Oh, it's normal. Some people just have chemical imbalances, and you can have anxiety and depression, and you can take this medication to make it right. And I was put on meds pretty early, when I was a teenager, to deal with all of this stuff. You know, did I do the therapeutic route as well? yes, but it was, maybe not necessarily a therapist who was equipped to deal with that. Here I am, this 13-year-old kid saying I can't stop praying. I'm constantly asking God for forgiveness. And it's, I mean, it was really interfering with my life because of that OCD, that obsessive compulsive disorder. And also I think I might be gay. And then he says, well, can I tell your mom, and I'm like, no way. And then he tells her anyway. So then I come home crying from school because the kids are bullying me. And she says, do you think it's because you might be gay? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she says, oh, well, that's what the therapist said. And I'm like, he must have misheard me. And, I don't go back to that therapist anymore, and so for me personally, I didn't get into trans, I got into drugs, because trans, I mean, it wasn't around at that time. But I can't imagine that I wouldn't be vulnerable to this. And that's totally speculation. Okay. Like I can't know that for sure. That's just speculation. So I'm not going to just completely copy and paste my own experience on different people. But I can't imagine if there weren't people that came along and said, "Oh, what do you feel more like, a boy?" Or I would be like, "Oh, well, obviously I feel like a girl. All my friends are girl. I love girl thing, um, and." Oh, and if I was celebrated for that, if I was special, if this wasn't a moral defect and a spiritual defect and something wrong with my soul, it was a medical defect that could be fixed and I could feel better and right and I could fit in, that I wasn't a fag, I was just a girl. My God, like it would have been just a total solution for me. But again, so I went down the drug and alcohol route, and look, I am lucky because it got bad really quickly. I mean, I ended up in psych wards, and by the time I was 19, I was, shot heroin. I did all of these things, and I was really heavily into drugs and alcohol. And then finally in my early 20s, I got sober because it just got so bad. I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm really one of the lucky ones. Like, been sober for, nearly 19 years now, I think. And I have beat the odds in terms of that because had severe mental health issues, severe drug and alcohol issues. They thought I was schizophrenic for a time. They diagnosed me with that, because I was having these psychotic breaks, but it was from all of the speed that I was, ingesting. So anyway, I slowly got better. And, so that's just my word. I guess that's where I came from. But how I fell down the gender rabbit hole was because once I started to get better, okay, and I'm going to therapy and I get sober and I'm really working on myself. Like I'm trying to get better and I can't sit with, when you get sober, you're faced with all of your demons, with all of this stuff. And you can look for all these different ways to cover it up. So you can't do drugs and alcohol anymore. You can still maybe smoke cigarettes, you can shop, you can have sex. Sex was hugely triggering because I had so much shame and guilt around it. So there was shopping and there were cigarettes, like it was just a whole mess of things. But eventually you're like, okay, this doesn't work anymore. This is just a temporary fix. This doesn't work anymore. You have to deal with this stuff. So then you just have to face it. And it can take years, but eventually you're like, I either deal with this or drink and die, and use drugs and die or whatever. Like you have to walk through it. And so I started dealing with that. And as I slowly got better, it was a long process. It had a lot of internal work and a lot of external circumstances that helped me as well. This is interesting, I think, but when I met the guy that I married, in 2011, I was 28 at the time. The following year, where I lived at the time, the Maryland State Legislature passed the marriage equality bill, and then it was going to be going to the ballot box via referendum in the November 2012 election. And suddenly I had a hat in the ring because I thought, oh, marriage isn't for me, like it's an antiquated institution. But then I fell in love with this guy and we really wanted to get married. Like I just wanted to marry him and he wanted to marry me. And I thought, oh, this is so crazy. Like the universe was aligning and all of these things are happening. So I kind of got involved with this campaign. And that passed. I was convinced that it wouldn't, but it did. And that moment when we realized that the majority of Marylanders thought that I should have, the right to marry my husband, now husband, they outnumbered. There's something that just kind of switched in my brain. Maybe I wish that I didn't have to rely on, majority opinions to feel some kind of self-worth, but there was a value in that. I did feel like I could hold my head up a little bit higher. I felt more a part of society and of the human race. It just felt like I was a member of this society that I had been kind of navigating and maybe on the outskirts of. I was a hairdresser at the time, and it just felt, when I had clients, I was a really busy hair. When I had clients come in and say, "Oh, when they would ask me about my engagement or my marriage, or just like I was just a normal person." It was just,
Mhm.
and I could just engage with these folks in just a normal way. It was really esteem building. And so for me, I thought, okay, well, I really want to continue. I want to keep chasing this high. So I'm going to get involved in activism.
Yeah.
Months later, I'm on this transgender rights legislation bill, just talking to senators about, anti-discrimination, not being able to discriminate in housing or employment for trans people, which I still think is reasonable, and so I, do this, and this was 2013, so this is really, really early. Didn't pass that year. That bill eventually passed maybe the following year. But I thought, this is something I want to do more with my life. I want to be a writer. I'd always wanted to be a writer. Maybe I'll be a journalist. Maybe I'll look at LGBT issues, etc., equality. But I really want to kind of, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I want to help, maybe possibly create a world where little girly boys and little butch girls are not tormented and not made to think that they are evil, wrong, bad, in the wrong, whatever. And that we can just make more space for them. And that, yes, I am not the norm. People like me are not the norm. And that's okay. Like, there is a minority and there are other people out there like me. And it's okay. It's okay to be different. It can be hard, of course it's not going to be perfect. We're not going to have this utopian, but I just thought, so as I went back to school, and I went to Columbia to finish my undergraduate degree. My husband and I moved to New York, and I'm ready and raring to go. Trump was just elected. I was devastated by his win, because I'm thinking, oh, this is, I'm going to #resist, and I'm part of this resistance. And I go into Columbia, and my first semester is in January 2017. So the first week that I'm there, Trump is inaugurated, or the second week that I'm there. And I encounter this culture of young people who are just existing on this different plane than me. I had thought that I was this progressive liberal person. I am a cis white gay. I am a relic of the past. I'm not the right kind of queer. Marriage, we should be upending society and raising, and building this new paradigm. We shouldn't be participating in these, white supremacist constructed institutions, all of these things. Decolonization. That was just like the buzzword.
Mhm.
And so then I intern at GLAAD. I get the summer internship at GLAAD over the summer of 2017, and I'm thrilled because I'm just like, I was going to work on something called the Trump Accountability Project. It was a new thing that they had just started. I'm like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. This is why I went back to school. This is what I'm doing. And I'm their news and rapid response intern. So I'm researching all of these bills and different legislation that's coming out and going, all of these things. At the time, there was a lot of talk about bathroom bills in the South, in Southern legislatures like Texas and, I don't know, maybe North Carolina, Louisiana, but a lot of them too were talking about trans kids, and that was the first time that I really kind of heard this term trans kid, right? And at the time, I just accepted. I'm like, these are the people that know, these are the people that are. Who am I? I'm not going to even. I wasn't like going to critically think about what they're telling me is the next movement or the next fight or what to do, because these are my people. But there were just little moments that would come into my brain, like, especially working with the other young people, that the other young the interns, because I'm again years older than a lot of my peers. At that time I was like 33, so I'm this non-traditional student, and so but I see these young people and I'm sitting there and there's this person next to me who says, oh yeah, I'm trans, my pronouns are they them, and I'm like, okay, that's like, are you multiple people? Like, I don't. And then also they, it was a woman. She was extremely gender conforming in the sense that she was just a woman, but she had like a short Miley Cyrus haircut and like maybe she didn't shave her legs. I don't know. And so she's trans, and then she's like on Grindr, the gay male, men's dating app. And then she's like, oh God, cis gays, they're so racist and problematic. And this, and she's white, like maybe I think Upper East Side, goes to like an upstate liberal arts college. And I'm just like, this is so weird. Like,
You
you're
could see all the layers of the hypocrisy, if I could call it that.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like, it just rubbed me and it also felt like you're just kind of trying on this identity, and like you're not a gay man, and then you're also like going into these gay male spaces and like policing the space about like I don't know, it was just very, it was so, I mean, my brain made the connection immediately with like as if a white person claiming a black identity and then going into black spaces and being like, oh, these black people are just so problematic, or they're so, it was like, what is going on here? And so I just swallowed my words and I became an anxious mess and just focused on my studies and excelled at school and just did all of these things. But that was the beginning of where I thought, first of all, there's an underbelly to this activist world that is just ugly as hell. And it's about squashing dissent, and it's not about having conversations and dialogue. It's about shutting people down. Don't like that at all. And also, I just started to think I don't necessarily agree with all of this stuff because I don't think it's based in reality, and really doesn't feel morally right. Like with the way that I'm supposed to be, especially with identity politics. The way that I'm supposed to suddenly see all black people as victims of capitalism and helpless. And like that it felt racist to me. It felt wrong. It was just very backwards. And so I'll speed up my story here, but I get through college and I graduate and I get into an MFA program at Wash U, coincidentally, Washington University in St. Louis, which is where Jamie eventually blew the whistle, which is full circle thing. And I'm the first semester's on Zoom because of COVID. And I'm right when I have this like, it's a great opportunity, fully funded, generous stipend. I'm thrilled. Nonfiction MFA. I mean, it's a dream, right? And I'm like, this is awesome. And they have this introduction seminar, and it's all the people from the department and all of this stuff. And I sign on. And by this time I had left, I'm like, was so ready to be out. Like, it was just like crazy. And by this time, I'm not necessarily really holding my tongue anymore, but I'm certainly not holding my thoughts. I'm kind of like letting them go, and I'm writing. So I'm writing things that are unorthodox, that are heterodox, that are just kind of talking back against the narrative, and not publishing them, but at least getting them down and organizing this dissent, this informed dissent. And so I sign on to this thing, and there's folks there with talking about like cis privilege, and then it was really bad. It was, and I thought, and I said to my husband, I'm like, I don't know if I belong here, because part of me thought, oh, it's this Midwestern university, maybe it'll be better. But also I kind of knew in my gut that things moved west, like it moves west, and then it just is a kind of a dumber version of what the woke, where it's sourced from. So there's like, they don't really know why they're saying this stuff, which is even worse. Because it's just like, oh, you're stupid and you've just bought this. You know what I mean? Like, you're not just a fanatic and a psycho and you bought this. Like, you're actually dumb.
Midwesterners in this. In
He's
the
not wrong. Here's
I'm not
the
wrong.
problem. He's not wrong. We do. It comes in from both coasts, it mashes in the middle, and then we're like, what are we gonna do with this? And then we dumb it all up. And then we
Obviously, we get it and we're cool with it because it came from the coast.
yeah.
Right. Right.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
I don't think
Came
I
from
don't
the elites. Right.
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
And let me tell you, listeners, it's trash. It's bogus. It's BS. It's nothing. It means nothing. It's not smart. It's not intelligent. They wrap up these ideas in these fancy words and they make it so intimidating and seductive, but also intimidating that if you have dissent, you're not fully grasping what they're saying, that you're not fully understanding. It is BS. So trust me, you're smarter than all of these people.
So you left the program, didn't you?
So I left the program after some, because I wrote a
tell
piece on
them?
my Substack.
Okay.
I wrote a piece on my Substack. I had like 5 subscribers at the time, you know, and maybe like and a couple paid subscribers, and they were, you know, of course, old friends and family. And I thought, okay, well, this is so nice. Like they're paying, maybe I'll put, you know, write something. And so I was visiting home with a friend, and I was telling them about the nightmare that is Columbia and WashU and all this stuff. And she said, you have to write about this. Like you have, and I'm like, there's no way. And she's like, well, I think it's important that you do, because I think there's probably some people that feel the same way. So I wrote a piece called "The New Homophobia in Higher Education," and I put it behind a paywall on my Substack. And I just wrote about my experience, and I said, look, you know, it was just and I used pseudonyms, you know, for people in the program, so whatever. Well, someone in the program saw, they purchased a subscription, took screenshots of all the problematic parts, circulated it, you know, quote unquote problematic parts, circulated it around the department, get an email, workshops canceled, DEI has been called, there's going to be an investigation, et cetera, et cetera. And I knew at that time, I'm like, I have to get out of here, because this is just going to be a struggle session. And this is the most oppressive creatively and intellectually. I mean, I just felt like I was losing my mind. And it was giving me time to write, but I couldn't do what I needed to do. So when I just realized that I needed to leave there, it was like a hope and a feeling of relief washed over me when I said that out loud. It was like, it was just, I knew, and it was such a relief. And I wrote them a letter. I said, I'm done. They were like, well, maybe you can stay, or you know, we have to have a conversation. Maybe you can, you know, and I said, my decision's final. That's it, you know? And so that was when I was free. I was free, and I could
You
write.
pieced up
and
right
I
before
could,
the intervention.
yes. And I could write. And I remember walking down the street, and I'm writing about this in my book, but like, I remember walking down the street, and it was cold. I think it was right around my birthday, in February. And I had some kind of, you know, whatever heretical thought about, who knows, gender or non-binary, something like that. And I kind of did like a cringe, like, oh, I'm not supposed to think. And then I realized, like, wait, I'm allowed to think that. It wasn't that I was just suppressing my speech. I was actually suppressing my thoughts. Like I was doing this self-flagellation for just thinking differently than other people. And that was such a weird, like, academia is supposed to be this place where you have this exchange of ideas and you can look at things, and it is the opposite. And so I wrote a piece about all of this for Quillette, and that was where it started. Like, Lisa came into my life after she read that piece. They titled it, I was a gay kid in a Christian cult, and then I joined the Church of Social Justice and Nothing Changed. Like, long title, but that's what they called it. They gave me a lot of space to write that. And that was where I just started meeting people that were like, hey, you're not alone. I think similarly to you, or I've had same feelings, and maybe we don't agree about everything, but you know, and I just started building these friendships and meeting people, and then started writing more and more and more. And once you break that, you feel, it's like I said this the other night, and it's like my dad, it's like, I truly believe that there's no greater liberation or freedom than the freedom to think and speak for yourself. It's just, that's it. It's just, there's no greater freedom than that. And so for me, it's like, I don't even care anymore. Like, they can come with me, they can put me under a guillotine, and I'm going to still be talking until they slice it off. Like, I'm just going to say, I don't even care if I'm the only one in the room that's going to be dissenting. I know what I think, and I'm going to say what I think. And I can admit when I'm wrong as well. I mean, good God, like, I can admit when there's room. I'm happy to admit where I'm wrong, but I'm certainly not going to be silent and shut up about it. And so that was where then I started, of course, looking at the research and looking at gender, so-called gender affirming care. What's the difference between me and these trans girls? Like what's the, and kind of looking and realizing, oh, there's really not that much of a difference. And looking at how, 9 out of 10, or let's say 62 out of 70 of the original cohort of
We're
the
gay.
Dutch protocol kids were gay, and all of these things, and just looking at, and then I read Bob Ostertag's book about, the history of gender medicine and how it was really just medicalizing gender nonconformity and all of these things. And I didn't look back. And so now I'm gonna shut up now, but I wanted to say, like, that's where the frustration comes from. When I was saying earlier, like, I'm done, because
Mhm.
I want to be nuanced about this stuff. I want to be sensitive about it. I want to talk about maybe, perhaps there is but the knowing that so much of this comes from this elitist, this academic detachment from postmodern detachment from reality, and not just litigating the past, but just kind of rewriting our history, rewriting reality. Their sex isn't real. All of these things, when I know that this is where that comes from, when people say, "Oh, you're racist if you don't support gender affirming," what does that have to do with race? But I know what it does have to do with race. Like, and I see where this came from, and so that's what I have a hard time with, is because I feel like I'm still arguing sometimes with the people, the morons in the humanities departments at these places. I still feel like I'm negotiating with them, and they're crazy. And
Can I first say thank you for sharing, thank you for sharing. And I'm also frustrated, and I cannot believe that there are people. There are so many off ramps. You're allowed to.
Mhm.
You can say no now. But I was thinking about when you said, all these ideas are just complete nonsense. And I was thinking about the what led to the coining of intersectionality and Kimberly Crenshaw, and it had to do with a case where I think at an auto worker plant where there were layoffs, and the last hired were the first fired. But the last hired were Black women, both because women couldn't work there for a long time and Black people couldn't work there for a long time. And so all of the people who got laid off were Black women because of the intersection of race and gender. And okay, we don't have those laws anymore. That's illegal now. But I think part of the problem is with it's all bullshit is that it isn't all bullshit. The 5% of the legacy of slavery, the 5% of Christianity, its perhaps biggest flaw is the lack of room for gender nonconformity that like funneled gay people into nuns. So like, how do we?
okay,
Everything became a slippery slope once we wanted to look at these ideas. They got institutionalized. We imbued them with power, but the impetus behind them, I mean, some of it is I don't want to throw it all out, because there was something called social justice, which is totally separate from wokeism, which is worth thinking about.
I want to, and I hear what you're saying completely. And when I say it's all BS, I am not saying that the problems don't exist. I'm saying that the solution that they are coming up with is BS, and they're shrouding it in this intellectual, this is the way, this is the gospel, the way, the truth, and the light, and it is not. It is you're not operating in reality. And so I'm not saying that those realities don't exist. I'm saying that I disagree with their way of saying this is the one way that you must fix it. I don't think it's pragmatic. I think that it's wrong. I think that it's backwards. I think that it's actually racist, that it's actually sexist, that it's actually anti-human. And so that's what I mean when I say this is BS. And so they're putting this solution in beautiful terms and using all of these euphemisms that are really seductive. And it is not. That's what I mean, Lisa.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
So I think we've probably reached the end of our listeners' willingness to continue to listen for this week. What I think we will continue to do is, first of all, we get amazing comments. What I'd love to do is do a lightning round of your non-gender thing this week. And then in the comment section, I think we should start opening it up. If people are finding news stories that they themselves are really interested in, please feel free to share them in the comments. We'll go through my origin next week, and then we will move on into some of our bigger topics. So, lightning round, non-gender, that maybe it does not involve pickpocketing and pot roasts this week. So come up with something new. Lisa.
The show Somebody Somewhere on HBO.
Oh,
Love it.
okay.
Good to know. Is it a half hour or an hour?
Half hour.
Perfect.
Bridget Everett. It's wonderful.
What about you, Eliza?
I feel like my non-gender thing this week has been trying and so far failing, but eventually will succeed in finding the right rescue cat or kitten. I tried and failed to get 2 sets of Siamese rescues this week.
You can have my cats. They woke me up a
Give
million
your cat.
times last night. They're all yours.
I'm going to find you some cats.
Lisa has
How will
really
they-
good track record with
How will they
cats.
get here?
Lisa, will you please put pictures of your cats in the show notes?
Yeah, Lisa has the most
They're
beautiful
they're
cats.
efficient.
You have beautiful cats, though.
Yeah, but I picked them for their looks.
So,
I-
Personality didn't. Anyway,
all right, Ben, you're non-gender.
My non-gender. Well, the first thing is the ruminating I'm going to do from taking up so much time and not having Jamie
No.
be able to tell her origin
not
story.
at all.
I feel like
No.
No, it was a
Um,
great story.
All right. Thank you.
we have time
My-
for everything.
I would share this if I could. Zoom's not letting me, but if I would share a screen with the viewers, which is okay. I got to see my best friend's baby this past weekend. She's getting ready to turn 1, and so we spent the past few days together, and she's just a wonderful baby, and she's so happy, and which I think is just a testament to her parents, because she's just the chillest, happiest, most loved baby, and it's just great. So that's my shout out for the
Babies.
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 Jamie, what's yours?
Jamie.
I'm going to be the most Midwestern possible. So once a year, Costco sends you a check for a percentage if you have the right kind of card. So I got my check in the mail this week for my percentage back for my Costco purchases. So I got to go to Costco and spend $100 on kind of on myself. I also bought pull-ups and other random Costco stuff, but still I felt very Midwestern walking in with my Costco check. So we don't ruin everything here.
I'd love to patronize Costco more, but where I don't have anywhere to put the stuff.
You don't have a place to put 7,000 rolls of toilet paper
No,
and
but I really would. I
125
like to.
applesauce
I would
cups.
like to, because I just want to say that I bought 4 rolls of toilet paper, a little thing of toilet paper today, $9.
Ooh.
I know, it is crazy.
I mean, I gotta really stop eating and drinking, so I use my toilet paper. Anyway,
Or start going out more and using other people's toilet paper.
yes,
That's the New Yorker way. All right, friends. I will see you next week.
next time.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.